think I have found an ideal method of finding books, like non-fiction books, that I am absolutely sure will be incredible. So my method is I only read books, non-fiction books in French, and I'm only choosing those that are written by female scientists, by researchers. There is like this specific genre of women who like write their PhD thesis and then they kind of write a non-fictional book for the general public based on their research. And it never fails to make a good book. Like, I think I read multiple ones. There is only one exception that I can name, but all the other ones are like incredible. So recently I read a book that I really liked, which is called Le pouvoir des lectrices, the power of women who read. It's about women who read in 19th century. Like, there was a lot of material. It was really nice. It was written in a very accessible way that it's really interesting. And she went into so much details. Like, she analyzed like all the reading habits, from magazines to spiritual literature to novels, everything that a woman would read and record in her diary in the 19th century France. It was very wholesome for me because these women, like, they were so driven by this desire for knowledge, despite extremely misogynist environment, that women who read would almost be seen as like mentally and physically ill and like a danger to society. In particular, it described, like women would get hysteria and depression thanks to book. Maybe there is a grain of truth, but it's kind of wrapped in the patriarchal vision. Because yes, I do think that all those like descriptions of these 19th century women getting depressed from reading books were right. Because reading is a way to cultivate yourself and to kind of ascend to open your mind and let your intellect go beyond the patriarchal lies that women were fed. It's like the Dworkin's quote about like how painful it is to be aware of misogyny that permeates the whole world. And I think that's why women were getting like depressed when they start to read and see that the patriarchal world vision they were fed was a lie. We're getting aware of their chains, and that's why I'm really grateful to be able to read, because even today not all women have the right to do it, whether this is because of patriarchal religions or poverty or anything, or male violence. It really made me feel connected to women that are very far from me. One thing I found really interesting was how women were sometimes taught to read and to get, they were getting some kind of education, but only to be good wives and mothers, and like afterwards take the task of educating their children, especially boys. And I find it really interesting because women were mostly encouraged to read like spiritual literature and things that would be useful to run the household and basically serve the males of the household, whether this is spiritually or physically. And reading just for your own enjoyment or like to educate yourself in like history or philosophy or natural sciences, that was seen as very dangerous and antisocial. And I find that really interesting because I think so many women even today who like live in the West and have access to lots of books, they still have this internalized male colonization of their minds, because women were only allowed to read men. They were only allowed male propaganda, basically. I find it interesting that even today, women in the West who know how to read, who have access to books, I think lots of them have still this internalized view towards reading. I'm really seeing the link between 19th century women who could only read things that are useful to men with women today who go on book talk and who are mostly interested in heterosexual romance in a very like patriarchal version, a dark romance or like abuse or very idealized versions of men that are seen in those books. I think like the book talk romances are literally like patriarchal propaganda. I know that women who read them, who read very like popular mass market books, are like often criticized for having like bad taste or whatever. I don't have beef with women reading like silly things for their own enjoyment. I have read like dozens of graphic novels in this year, but my problem is they are getting fed patriarchal propaganda of the desirability of like relationships with men. Even though they have access to worldwide culture, they are still, like 3 centuries later, are reading books that only serve male interests. And I find that kind of sad. And this is why I'm really inspired by the women that these books talks about. Some of them were really brave with what they were reading and not afraid to branch out. And I'm happy to be like the spiritual granddaughter, I guess. There's something that I found really funny in this book, and because it talks about Flora Tristan, who was a feminist who fought for like rights of working people in particular. She was really into reading because it was for her a tool of cultivating a political vision, especially for women. And she had a woman who was, I'm not sure how to translate it, blanchisseuse, who was kind of a fan of her, who wrote her letters, and then Tristan decided to be her mentor in a way, so that this woman would later take her place as a leader of a feminist and workers' rights movement. And she kind of like gave her instructions on what to read and how. I think like I'd like to maybe do a little challenge for myself where I, like for a month or two, I follow the instructions that Tristan gave to her friends, students, in order to like raise her in some kind of powerful political woman. It sounds interesting. To be honest, this year I was more focused on novels. I read lots of like things about nature, and I don't know, like I read a lot, but I think like right now I've only read books by women, and most of them also talk about women. Lots of them also had like feminist thing, but to be honest, I feel there's not enough feminism in my system. I would like to like read more classical feminist literature, more about history of women and like political stuff, socialist and communist classics by women. I'll try to like follow the same program or challenge that Flora Tristan gave to her students. I think that could be fun. This book made me think of Anastasia Litz's video on women who read. I think she also talks about like 19th century, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was in her other like podcast. My theory is women who read are so demonized, especially if they're not reading like patriarchal propaganda as like spiritual or romantic. They are so demonized because the written word is seen as the prerogative of men. Like in patriarchal culture, and especially religions, women are like the stinky material bodies, and men are the spirit, the spoken word. First there was word, and then there was light, which is something that was like Christianity and postmodernist philosophers share in the misogyny. When women start to read and write and be really in the mastery of the language, I think this really pisses off men, because they suddenly start to realize that women are better than them with language. And suddenly the whole house of cards that the patriarchy has built starts to come down. I think this is really interesting. Like, this is something we should think about more. And this is why I enjoy reading and writing to a very, in a very particular way.